there like a greater purpose at the end of it? Was it like religion based? I mean, because like it seems like it's its own, like how everybody's calling it cult like, where it's its own set of rules. There's this own prophet. Was your headmaster the person that everybody wanted to be, or was it somebody else that they were all trying to aspire to be as well?
No, so I'll answer your question, but to start off, I just want to say there's a pamphlet that gets handed to the girl by her headmaster at the other school before she goes to this school. I think they call it Trail Pines or something.
Hmm.
And and it says, see yourself as you really are and do something with it. My school is called CDO, and they told us CDO meant see yourself and do something with it. What I came to learn only less than a decade ago is that CDU stood for Charles E. Diedrich University. And Charles E. Diedrich was the founder and head of a cult called Synanon. And Synanon was based on a cult that was started for people who are alcoholics and people who had drug addictions. And they would do things like what they called the hot seat in the show, Wayward. We called them raps. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 1 until 5 p.m. You sat in the rap and you were in a circle and you would be in the hot seat. And so that's why she called it hot seat in the movie. But and you would have to do something called run your anger, which they talk about, where unless you are face down screaming at the floor like they did in the movie where the kid starts crying and snot's coming out and all the kids are yelling at you, you haven't done a good job. You have to run your anger, and after that is when everybody will put their arms around you, be like, I love you so much, I'm so proud of you. But up until then they'll be like, you did this, you did that, you're this kind of person. And there's a terrible story that I don't even know if I should share, and maybe we should cut this out, but I will. In Iraq, there was a kid who was dealing with being gay. He was maybe 14 or 15 or something. And I guess it was part of his story. Like his parents
Hmm.
didn't like that he was gay, or he was dealing with being gay, whatever that means. Okay. And I can't remember because again, I'm 50 and I was 13 or 14 at the time when this happened.
Right.
But I remember the staff member getting up and kind of walking to the back of the room, and usually no one got up. The staff member also sat in the circle, and they got up and they went and got something out of a cup, and they walked around to the back of this kid, and this kid's getting yelled at about I don't know, being inappropriate maybe with boys there or something. I can't really remember, and it turned into a conversation about his gayness and how disgusting he was for being gay. And what ultimately happened, I'm not going to get into the details, but the teacher made him put his head back, and he poured, like, I guess it was salt water or something in this kid's mouth, almost like waterboarding him. Okay. And was screaming at him about what is that like having that come in your mouth? Like fucking terrible, terrible. And this kid was, I mean, traumatized and was choking, and the kids are yelling at him. That's the kind of stuff that would go on there. Right. So, anyways, for the betterment of stuff, depends what you think is better. You don't believe somebody is gay. Okay, they were trying to get the gay out of this kid, right? For me, I graduated there, and what's so fucked up about it, the day that I graduated, I was sobbing. I didn't want to leave. I felt like that was my family. I never went home again after that. I went to a boarding school for a year, and then I went off to college. And I felt like I was losing my home because at some point, my father, I could talk about this for hours, but so at some point, my father died when I was there. I was alone. My father tried to have me escape. He sent me money to escape with and to run away with. I did run away a couple times. It's just like that. They go searching for you. Everyone in the town is in on it. If you flag a cop down, they will bring you right back to the school. It's very scary trying to leave. And so when my father died, I knew I had no option to get out. So I just was like, I'm just gonna embrace it. So I became the head of the dinner dishes committee, which means that the kids that got in trouble, I was the one that gave them their punishment. I told them, you're the one scrubbing the floor with the toothbrush. You're the one doing this. I mean, I was their leader, even though I was part of the school. And so it was sad for me to leave. And so a lot of the good qualities, whether you call them good or not, about me having gone there, I can read people really, really well. I can read emotion. I know when someone's lying. I'm almost triggered by that because you were not allowed to lie there. If you lied, you got in trouble all the way
Right.
from like, just the littlest thing. Also I'm very transparent. Like I'm very direct because you learn how to speak that way. I'm very open because once a week you had to share your story and tell all these things. I think I have a lack of emotion about things that a lot of people, like if someone dies or if there's something really tragic that people are like, they cannot get over in their own lives, it doesn't affect me like that because, it just doesn't affect me.
Yeah.
A lot of the emotion came out of it because I had to go through so many things there and get so in touch with things that I'm not stifled by emotion like that. And I've learned like good, their habits. By the way, I do not make my bed every day and all that, but we had um everything we cleaned up. We took care of animals. I had to chop wood. There's a scene in there about the kids carrying wood in the background. That is an ode to Sidu for 6 months, your first 6 months when you're there. From 9 until 12, until lunchtime, you are down chopping wood. Huge redwood rounds. We were like cross cutting, and then when the cross cut is done, then you chop the wood. That is what the wood is that heats the whole main house and heats the systems that are there. Your second 6 months, you're working on a farm and you're taking care of all the animals. I put PVC wire in the Barbarossa's den. I'm filming. And so, those are the things that I learned from being there that I think are very good um, things and
Yeah.
qualities and experiences. I had to artificially inseminate a cow. Can you imagine
Jesus.
ever having to do that?
No.
They taught me how to do it. I had to do it. I mean, it was insane shit that, no
Yeah.
one would ever be doing.
And this is where I'm glad you tied it all together with the Synanon cult, or Synanon cult. And
Yeah.
I wonder, have you, before I go on the way that I view this from an outsider's perspective, have you ever been to a 12 or Alcoholics Anonymous, or like, have you ever been to any
Yes,
anonymous
I've
classes?
I've been to a class only because I went to celebrity rehab and they would let us leave 3 times a week because the people I was in celebrity rehab with were all dealing with a drug addiction.
Right.
So I went to those with them because we had to be a part of it.
Got it.
I've also been to sex and love addiction meetings because I was there for love addiction. So I've been to all those meetings, but
Yeah.
I've never struggled with an addiction like that. So I
For
didn't go for that, but I'm
yeah.
aware of it.
Yeah, because the way that I viewed it as a person who's been to like sex addict anonymous classes before, I was like, this is just the process. And so when I look at a school like this, I just like all the benefits you listed, like I saw it. I was a special education teacher with students with emotional disturbance. The amount of rewiring that you need to do to people that have had extreme trauma early in ages that have led them to that point now, it's not easy. And I'm
Right.
not saying that the methods that they were using were correct, but the methodology of you need that intensive support if you ever want them to see the better version of themselves. And I think it teaches a level of self-sufficiency at an early age that a lot of kids these days, will never really have to experience. So it's very old school style of thinking, just because modern technology has coddled us to the point where there's still like 40-year-olds living at home, you
Well,
know?
it's such a good point that I've
Yeah,
actually never thought of. I mean, you're right. You have to rewire your brain. I mean, I can think of plenty of lazy kids and even kids that came in. There was this guy, Shane Erbish, who came. He was a ward of the state and he came there and he was part of a gang, like a crazy gang. His brother was in prison for scalping, like literally
Jesus
removing the
Christ.
scalp of somebody and killing them. And Shane was a scary, badass kid from like, Watts or whatever. And was eventually, 8 months in, taking a knitting class, I'll never forget sitting on the couch up in the main house knitting during his free period because of all the work he had done. But he was very, he would be in the hot seat in those wraps and he would be shaking with anger and not letting anything out. And eventually he got into it and he would be screaming at the floor and he would get it and he would soften up. And every day he softened up. And I loved this kid. And unfortunately, he's in prison for life now because even after the fact, I think he maybe 10, 15 years after the fact, he got in some trouble and ended up in prison for life, which is terrible because I went to school with these kids. And the weird thing is thinking that all these people were my family members because we bonded over such trauma. I don't speak to any of them. Like it's very strange. Everybody went off on their own paths. There's one person I live in the same community as. She doesn't even acknowledge that she went there. She tells people that she knows me because we went to a fancy boarding school. It was fancy in the way that it was like $90,000 a year, but insurance paid for a lot of it for some of these kids. And it was not fancy by any means. It was a
Yeah.
fucking nightmare,
Intense.
and again, in 2010, it was closed down for abuse. So, but so I can't ever talk to her about it because
Yeah.
she just totally doesn't acknowledge it.
Yeah. And let's, I guess we've done our part in highlighting the good that this place can bring, but at the same time, I mean, I think it gets outweighed by new trauma. So it's like when I say rewiring the brain, it's almost like they're rewiring the brain by adding even more trauma that you really didn't even need in the first place. So it's just kind of like replacing it. But I am a firm believer in I wish there was more schools that are similar to that, but could, approach it in a way where the family is involved. So it's not like this isolation, alienation, you ruin the family type of vibe.
And I
Um,
think, listen, I have the woman, well, I won't say who it is, but I know someone who did send their child there to a similar school in Vermont, I think it was, they were upstate New York. And there's been over time, I think it's changed. So now these are schools that do not do such work
and
that's like
crazy, yeah,
traumatizing,
yeah,
and they only have to be
hot
there
seat
for a
work
semester. Yeah.
for sure.
So I think there are schools out there like that. But I mean, did you have any questions after watching the
Yes.
show or any thoughts?
The grooming. Was it like group showers? Did it like it seemed like everything was just monitored to a T at this place? So like I was like, how do these kids have any sense of privacy? So like what was that whole process like of getting ready and was it cold showers? What like fill me in on all that.
Okay, so that was made for TV. That's not what it was like.
Okay.
We lived in so Sea-Doo was it looked like a big community on a piece of property. So there was a main house. It was called the house, and then there was dorms, and they looked like dorms, right? But they were like cabin looking dorms, kind of. But they were pretty nice on the inside because we kept them so clean, and they were, it wasn't hardwood floor. It was like carpet to make it more warm. Um, the shower, you had your own bathroom to the dorm,
Okay.
and then there was a shower in there that you all, you shared the bathroom and you shared the shower. So I noticed they all had a uniform on. That is not what we wore. That was an exaggeration. But what's interesting, we had a certain allowance of what we were allowed to wear. Everything had to be tucked in, nothing could be tight. It was like t-shirts had to come a certain length. You couldn't wear any black. You couldn't have I believe you couldn't have a belt, or did you have to have a belt and always have it on? I can't remember, but there was something with belts. And you couldn't wear heels. It was only sneakers. You couldn't wear open toes.
Hmm.
So it was somewhat of a uniform, but you could bring your own clothes. Um, when you arrive, they go through your bag and they take out anything that would be deemed too sexy or too tight or whatever. You couldn't really wear a dress unless it went all the way down and really was loose and covered everything, but you had to have a belt around it so it wasn't too flowy, that kind of stuff. And then in terms of music, I noticed that they were playing music in one of the scenes. I'm forgetting what it was. And I turned to Dan and I said, I bet you it's going to be a John Denver song or something like that. We could only listen to John Denver, um, John Lennon. There were certain acceptable
Right.
music, even though we were in the 80s and 90s, that things that were from like the 70s that you were allowed to hear, which is kind of interesting too.